Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of ConsensusCON, leveraging video at each stage of the sales cycle with Earl Feldman, Director of Strategic Consulting at Pros. ConsensusCON is focused on helping our current and future customers scale pre-sales by getting the most out of consensus automation. Our presenter lineup includes some of our top accounts as well as industry experts. We are very happy to announce our newly created forum to continue to help build our user community and give you a space to communicate with one another, discuss best practices, and much more. We'll also be starting a monthly webinar series beginning in December to continue to provide resources for you, our user base. And we are recording this session, and it'll be made available to those who weren't able to attend or those who would like to revisit the session. And now there will be a Q&A session after the presentation is finished. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A section and they'll be addressed after the presentation. And one last thing before we get started, there is a button to raise your hand. If you can hear me, please click that button so I know that the sound is working. Okay, we've got a couple of those. Okay, perfect, great. And if you can see my screen, the title card with Earl's beautiful face, can you please raise your hand again? All right, fantastic. All right, well, to get started, let me tell you a little bit about Earl. Earl has been a leader of pre-sales consulting teams focused on selling AI-driven enterprise software solutions for over 15 years. He has a strong track record of value-based selling and executive level consulting. Earl currently holds the position of Director of Strategic Consulting at Pros, an enterprise software company that provides AI-based pricing tools and strategies to organizations worldwide. Earl earned an MBA from the University of Maryland and a BA degree from the University of Pittsburgh. He is based in Pennsylvania, where he is constantly on the go with his wife and 3 teenage children. Earl, thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thanks so much for that nice introduction, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our learnings with the user community. And like everyone else, we are facing the turbocharged nature of moving the economy and the industry moving to digital selling and digital communication that the pandemic has really accelerated. And it's fundamentally changed the way that buyers and sellers interact with one another. And I'm really excited because tools like Consensus are kind of right in that sweet spot as people get used to more and more interactions via their screen instead of face-to-face. Tools like Consensus, I think, are going to only continue to become more and more part of the norm in terms of not only getting your message across, but also reinforcing messages that you're sharing in more live forums. So what I'd like to do today is share with you some of the learnings around how best to leverage video to do more than just reinforce features and functions of your software or of your solutions that you're demoing, but rather how to leverage video to help you not only build relationships with your prospects, but really drive an opportunity through the sales cycle. And over the last year or so that we've been using Consensus, we've gone through a lot of trial and error around what content works best at each stage of the sales cycle. And I want to share with you today a little bit about what we've learned when you're asking yourself that really fundamental and critical question: what should I include in this video that I'm going to send to the prospect? And even before that, should I be sending a video to the prospect? But before I get started, let me give you a little bit of context of the paradigm that I'm sharing our experiences from. So as Derek kindly said, my name is Earl Feldman. I'm a Director of Strategic Consulting here at a software company called Pros. And in our world, strategic consultants are part of the pre-sales organization. And they're very talented people who not only have to be that tier 1, tier 2 technical expert on what our solution can and can't do, but more importantly, they also have to have a great deal of business expertise and acumen, because our platform that we're selling is enterprise grade and is truly a highly configurable platform. It's not just software that we sell out of the box and it plugs and plays in every environment, but rather we really have to do a lot of work to match up the prospect's situation, their needs, their environment, etc., with how our software will or won't be able to fit into their environment and help out. So having to figure out not just what our software can do, but how our software will help our prospects is a big part of what we do from a pre-sales perspective. What does pros do? So as you can see on your screen, we price everything, everywhere, all the time. And that means we help companies set winning pricing strategies and help them execute on those winning prices for their products and services. So when you think about very large companies with hundreds of thousands of SKUs who are selling either B2B or B2C, you can imagine that they would have multiple pricing strategies across all their different channels at scale in real time. And this can be a very complex issue, and that's where the pros software comes in. So that tells you a little bit about what we do. And as you can see here, we do it a lot. We actually are the market leader in our space, and we drive pricing for some of the largest companies in the world. So that's the paradigm, the context that I'm coming from when I talk about sharing our learnings moving forward. So now that we've kind of laid the groundwork, I like to start with this quote, and I love it because I think it's especially pertinent to the ways that companies have to sell today and have to communicate with their prospects. It's a quote from noted author and sales strategist Jill Kornrath, and it says, "Sales is an outcome, not a goal. It's a function of doing numerous things right, starting from the moment you target a potential prospect all the way through until you finalize the deal." What I really love about this quote is the first part. It really resonates with me in terms of doing numerous things right throughout the sales cycle. And video for us has been an invaluable tool for helping us get our messages to not only get across, but really stick. So we consider leveraging tools like video to be part of doing things right throughout that sales cycle. But there's also, in my opinion, a critical component that has to be taken into account when you're thinking about, should I send a video and what content should I be including? And that component is timing. So how do you ensure that the video that you'll be creating and forwarding along will help you move a deal forward and not become just noise to the prospect? And from our perspective, through our learnings, we think the answer is not just providing great content, but the content has to line up with the prospect's priorities at that point in time in the sales cycle. So let me give you an example. If you've got a prospect who's looking for software to help solve a business need or a challenge that they have, or help them accomplish a strategic objective, and they're just kind of starting out in the sales process and they're looking to see what's out there, who's out there. So you have an initial conversation with them as a vendor, and you're really at this early stage trying to show what your software can do and what kind of outcomes you want to drive to help educate that prospect. But we've fallen into the trap before where, again, this is part of that trial and error, we've fallen into the trap before where early on, we want to show off our solution and all the great things it can do, and not just what it can drive in terms of outcome, but the detail of how it will drive those outcomes. And that's an important piece of it, set of information, set of data to convey to the prospect, but the timing is off. So when we send too much detailed information in a video supporting our messages, and it's too early on in the sales cycle, we've not only confused the prospect, but we've probably opened up a bunch of rabbit holes that we don't want to go down with them, as opposed to really trying to orient them to what our software can do, not how it can do it. And it turns out that when we do that, we've actually slowed deals down before because we've created noise and confusion. So the point here is to make sure that we're understanding from a timing perspective how our messages line up with the prospect's priorities at that point in time. So the first question we really need to ask ourselves when we're thinking about whether or not we want to leverage video to reinforce and support our messaging is, should we be sending a video at all? And so as you can see here, I provided some of the questions that we ask ourselves when trying to come up with that yes or no, go or no go kind of decision around whether or not to send video at all. But I really love the last question that we have to ask ourselves on this page, because it really begins to force us to look at things through the prospect's eyes and through their point of view, and not just our own point of view. More on this to come in just a minute. But let's say we've decided, yep, we think video could really do a good job and is appropriate at this point in the sales cycle to help us get our message across or help us reinforce the messages that we've shared during meetings or demos. And we really want to leverage video to help our message stick. So now the interesting question becomes, what content should we be providing? And again, for me, this is where it really starts to get interesting in terms of thinking through what we should be sending. So before I dive into what we should be sending, I just kind of want to orient the user community here around the points of view that most selling organizations take. So what you're seeing here on your screen is a sales methodology. It happens to be the one that we at Pros use. There's all kinds of methodologies out there. Some have 3 phases, some have 8 phases, everywhere in between. Again, this one just happens to be ours. So just to orient you real quickly, phase 1, really just getting to know the prospect. What are their strategic goals? What are their objectives? What are they trying to accomplish? And just high level introducing them to us and what our software, what our capabilities, what the value we may bring looks like. As we move into phase 2, now we're really starting to get to know each other a little bit more. We may be showing high-level introductory demos and talking about what outcomes our solutions can drive. And then we want to reinforce those messages along the way. As we move deeper into the sales cycle and kind of check the box that maybe we're a vendor that they want to learn more about, now we really get into the deep dive around how our solution works. I like to call it the army crawl through the software. Learn, do we fit into their technical ecosystem, etc. As we check those boxes and move through the sales cycle, how do we differentiate ourselves and show that we're the most valuable partner to work with? And then in phase 5, you're closing up the deal, legal, commercial terms, that sort of thing. And this is pretty common. And whether your sales cycle looks like this or it takes a long time, like for example, since we're selling very complex deals at enterprise levels, our average sales cycles are somewhere between 8 and 12 months. So a long period of time. And so each one of these phases takes a long period of time. But whether you're like us and have these long sales cycles, or whether you have sales cycles that just take days or weeks, I'm sure that your sales organization uses some sort of methodology like this to guide how you sell, how you manage your reps, how you forecast, etc. And the reason I share this is it's all pretty standard stuff. What we've learned, especially relative to using tools like Consensus, is that it's very easy, especially when your sales cycles take a long time, to only look at things from your own perspective. And what's important, I think, in order to be able to create really valuable, meaningful content that's going to stick with your prospect, is to be able to step back and recognize that just because this is the way we look at the sales cycle, and this may drive the activities that we want to take or the actions that we want to take through the sales cycle, it's not necessarily always in line with how the prospect is looking at their buyer's journey, what we call the sales cycle. So I think it's really important, and the key point here is it's really important to be able to say, okay, we've got our methodology. We know that we use that as our internal common language, but how do we step back and really make sure that we understand the prospect's priorities and we're addressing them and guiding them through the sales cycle based on what their priorities are. So we want to be able to see things through their eyes. And it seems rather fundamental, but it's so easy, particularly if you're a quarterly driven public company, to get caught up in your own sales methodology. So what I really think is important is for us, as I mentioned, to be able to look at things through the prospect's eyes. And what I love about this chart is that it really kind of highlights for us not just what the priorities are, as you can kind of see some sample priorities over here on the right side, risk and price and business needs and the solution, but the fact that they change throughout the sales cycle from a priority perspective is so important to really nail. And understanding that is critical to making sure that whatever messaging you're putting out there, leveraging video to reinforce that message or drive that message, has to line up with what their priorities are. So I believe that understanding where these two perspectives intersect with one another at each stage of the sales cycle is what drives the content that you should be sending and you should be using in your videos to both reinforce the messages that are top of mind for that prospect at that point in time, as well as to start anticipating what their priorities are going to become as we move through the buyer's journey from their perspective, and start leveraging your messaging and your videos to start communicating and laying the groundwork for how are we going to address what we perceive to be the emerging priorities as new players get involved on the prospect side, or as we kind of naturally move through that sales cycle. And if you can use videos in these ways to reinforce what's top of mind for them now, as well as to start to control the narrative of what's going to become important to them, that's how you can really leverage video to drive a deal through the sales cycle, as opposed to being purely reactionary as those priorities change and they start asking their questions of you. So with that, let's take a little bit of a deeper look into each one of these phases, just to highlight in a little bit more detail what I mean. So if we're thinking about early on in the sales cycle, we can see, denoted by this black dotted line, that from the prospect's perspective, that communicating their business needs is really top of mind, and making sure that they've even got it solidified in their own mind in terms of what it is we're trying to accomplish. How does it match up with our company's strategic initiatives? And is this really something we should be looking at? And how are we communicating that out to potential vendors? Equally or almost as important, but very important from a priority perspective early on, is what solutions, denoted by this solid blue line, are out there in the marketplace that could potentially help us accomplish our goals. And are there solutions out there? And let's start kicking the tires and getting to know them a little bit and see what's out there and what they can do. Also, not surprisingly, denoted by this green line, early in a sales cycle, very upfront, people want to understand is what's the cost, what's the value, is it bigger than a bread box, is it something that I might be able to bite off, or it's completely out of my budgetary appetite, and what value am I going to get? So these are the types of topics that we should be addressing during, from a messaging standpoint, during these early stages. So some of the key themes that we like to use in these early stages through our video tool is demonstrating understanding of the business challenges and their initiatives, and setting expectations that we've worked with other companies like yours, and we've gone through implementations like this, and we've been able to provide a lot of value. Maybe introductory high-level demos at this point, with not customized demos, but high-level, just to show, again, not how the software will accomplish those goals, but more so, what are the outcomes that we typically drive with our software? And then also making sure that we're setting those expectations that we're a value provider, as opposed to just providing features and functions that will generate some dollars. But there's a lot that goes around it from a partnership perspective, especially when you're a SaaS software provider like we are. So that's all pretty straightforward in terms of addressing those priorities that are top of mind. But I think where one of the lessons that we've really learned and taken to heart is, as you can see denoted by this red line, which represents the concept of risk, it may not be the highest priority right now early on, but as we start to move from phase 1 and 2 into phase 3, we can anticipate that risk from the prospect's perspective is going to become more and more top of mind for them. And risk could look like many things based on various stakeholders on the prospect side. It could be the risk of, hey, does your company, how does it stack up feature function wise against your competitors? Is your company going to be around? Are they financially stable? If we're going to invest in software with you, are you going to be there for us? Risk could look like security, data security, particularly when you're talking about SaaS solutions, right? Risk could also take the form of, hey, this could be a big transformational project for us to take on from the prospect's perspective. And that takes courage. It takes courage to step up and say, yeah, we're going to really try and transform our business. So there's risk in taking on a project versus doing nothing. So as we start to think about those risk profiles early on in the sales cycle, as we're creating content that addresses those top of mind themes and priorities, we also want to start to pepper in with vignettes and messaging around why we're the low risk option relative to the marketplace, relative to doing nothing, relative to our competitors. And if we can start to lay the groundwork now early on, before it becomes top of mind, then it becomes a much easier conversation down the road when risk really starts to elevate on their priority list, and we're controlling the narrative instead of reacting to their questions that may or may not be comfortable for us to answer, depending on where they're coming from. So the concept here is not just looking at what's top of mind for them, but leveraging our tools like video to start laying the groundwork to control the narrative around priorities that we expect will become important to them next. So let's look a little deeper into the sales process as we transition from phase 1 to phase 2. As I mentioned, phase 3 is kind of where we're really doing that army crawl, that deep dive through the solution. As you can see, that's top of mind here with the blue line. The needs, the business needs line is starting to decline a little bit because, again, the prospect at this point is feeling like, okay, the vendors whom I'm speaking with do understand my business needs. Now I got to figure out who's the best fit for my environment and how the solutions work and what will it look like for me day to day. But as we projected, as additional people get involved, risk becomes more and more of an increasing topic of concern. So again, if we've laid the groundwork, we can have those discussions and control them and shape them in a way that kind of heads off some of those risk factors before they really become a concern for the prospect. So some of the themes we like to include in our videos at this stage of the sales cycle are, again, of course, we want to support the features and functions and capabilities that we've shown in demos with video. And it's kind of what I think of it as the traditional sort of sweet spot for consensus videos, kind of reinforcing those, those features and functions and capabilities, and that's important. But we also want to highlight our user interface and show that we're easy to use. We want to make sure that if we've done a proof of concept and there's some meaningful results, that we're sharing them and reinforcing them through video here. And as I mentioned, whatever risk factors are becoming more and more important to them, that we're demonstrating that we have strategies to mitigate those risk factors. But again, as we move through this phase 3 and start to look towards transitioning beyond it, we want to take a look at and try to anticipate what's going to become important for the prospect next and what is going to be a raising priority. And as you may recall, this green line is around price. So we know that there's going to start to be increased pressure on us from a pricing perspective as we move towards closing the deal. And so before it gets to those negotiations, we also want to include in our videos at this point vignettes around our thought leadership, as a differentiator, our expertise as a differentiator, and other ways to show how we bring value beyond just what our software will do, what a partnership with us will mean beyond just our features and functions that we're providing. In other words, trying to lay the groundwork for this is a value sell as opposed to a commodity sell, where at the very end, all the vendors get to the finish line at the same time, and then it becomes a pricing bake-off. So if we can successfully start to control the narrative down here on this green dotted line as we transition out of phase 3, now we're really starting to lay the groundwork for that partnership and that value sell. So as we transition out of phase 3 into the latter stages, you can see, okay, we've kind of checked the box with the solution, that our solution will bring value. So that's why this blue line is declining. And as new stakeholders get involved from an executive perspective or from a sign-off perspective, from a steering committee perspective, they may introduce their concepts around risk as well. And then, of course, as we projected, price will become an issue as we start to go through commercial negotiations. So some of the content that we try to include from a video perspective to support our messaging are, again, what are our key differentiators at the strategic level, at the tactical level? What do analysts think about us? Why are we the best option for them to go with versus our competitors, as well as versus doing nothing? If we provided a business case, we make sure that it lines up not only with their tactical project objective, but also with strategic business objectives that have been announced. We differentiate ourselves through case studies and testimonials and executive alignment and all those wonderful things that you need to, messages that you need to send to help bring a deal to closure. And we reinforce those messages at that time in the sales cycle. And if we're fortunate enough to win the business, we also want to make sure that we're starting to have an eye towards what are those priorities going to be next after the deal is closed, to control that narrative as well. So one of the things we like to do before the deal is closed is to include vignettes around how we will care for them long term once a deal is closed. Because again, we're a SaaS provider. So when the deal is closed, that's really just kind of the beginning of the next stages of the relationship with the now customer, because we have to go through an implementation. And then of course we have to support and manage that now customer through the entire life cycle of that contract. So we always want to make sure that we're leveraging video to support the messages around not just what's top of mind now, but again, what's coming next. And if we can do that, if we do that successfully, and if we leverage video successfully, that's how we help shorten sales, how we think video helps shorten sales cycles, and it helps address needs before they become problems or major concerns, and it helps push the deal through that sales cycle. So with that, I also wanted to say, through our trial and error, we have a couple other bonus tips that I want to share with you beyond just sort of that key learning, if you will. So real quickly, as I mentioned, since we're a SaaS software provider, once that deal is closed, that relationship with that now customer is just beginning. So we try to leverage video beyond the close of the sale to do things like celebrate milestones during implementation, celebrate milestones once we've gone live, once metrics are met or return on investment is achieved. We also use it to share that new capabilities are about to come out on our SaaS platform, to get people excited about it. We've kind of learned the hard way that if you turn on features and functions and one day the user comes in, boots up their system, they're like, huh, there's 3 new buttons there. I guess Pros is going to come train me on how to use them. That's not exactly the way to generate excitement. So we try to leverage short vignettes to say, hey, these capabilities are coming. We think you'll be really excited about it. Be on the lookout. Here's when they're coming. Another way that we like to leverage video that keeps us top of mind and reinforces that partnership and that comfort level with the partnership for that customer is that we do a lot within our organization of industry thought leadership kind of activities. So if someone's written a white paper or written a book or spoken at a conference or really anything that we think would be of value to our prospects, instead of just emailing some of those things over, there are times when we choose to front end that with a vignette to say, hey, thought you'd really be interested in this. Hope that this is meaningful to you. If you have any questions or if you'd like to help us continue to remain on that cutting edge of thought leadership, let's talk. So it's just another way to kind of maintain that partner status as opposed to that vendor status, if you will. Bonus tip number 2, we're also big believers in top-to-top or executive-to-executive relationships. As I mentioned, our sales cycles tend to be very long, very complex, because we're at an enterprise level with some of the biggest companies in the world. And so we think that having that exec-to-exec relationship early on in the sales cycle is really critical to help make sure that we're staying in line with the strategic objectives and that the project itself isn't straying away from those strategic objectives. So we try very hard to have our executives, who, by the way, really love this and really have embraced this, to do check-ins along the way. This is not in place of having that phone call or that meeting, but if for whatever reason they can't connect, leveraging video to say, hey, it's early in the sales cycle. We're really excited about doing the potential of doing business with you. Here's the team I've lined up for you. Let me introduce them to you. This is a team that will not only take you through the sales cycle, but your entire life cycle journey with pros. Or it might be giving peace of mind if we've gone live and all of a sudden, we're software, so things happen from time to time, and all of a sudden a prospect or now a customer is logging some help tickets. It's okay for an executive to create a vignette, send it over to their corresponding executive and say, hey, I see that we've got some bumps in the road. Just want to let you know and reassure you, our team is on it. They're keeping me posted. I'm keeping a close eye on this, and I will keep you posted on our progress. Not to take the place of that discussion, but one-on-one if it can be had, but certainly to augment it. And leveraging our executives like this has worked really, really well for us, because what it does is it keeps us top of mind for that executive, because they're not involved oftentimes in the day-to-day of how the tool's being used. But when it comes time to renew that software license or sell additional capabilities to the customer or expand into additional business units, we don't have to re-educate that executive on who pros is and what we're all about, because they already feel like, wow, these guys are overly communicative with me in creative ways. And so I know who they are. I feel confident moving forward with them. And even when things go wrong, maintaining that communication is really important, because it shows that they are top of mind for us and solving their problems, whether it be through selling them something or fixing what we sold for them or whatever it happens to be, is really our top priority. So leveraging videos in those creative ways beyond just supporting feature function demos really go a long way for us as we as we walk through this life cycle with our customers. So all that being said, I'm hoping that the things you take away from this talk are, first of all, ask yourself and be intellectually honest with yourself. Is leveraging video at this point in time in a sales cycle really going to help drive the deal forward? Is it going to help advance the deal? Or am I just trying to pile on more information that may actually confuse or slow things down? And if the answer is, yeah, we think video is going to really help here, think long and hard from the prospect's perspective, not just your own selling methodology perspective, about what content to create and leverage based on what the prospect's priorities are at that point in time and at that stage of the sales cycle. That the timing element has to line up in order for your message to be effective and to stick. And if you can also pepper in and create vignettes around the topics that we believe will become priorities soon from that prospect's perspective in the sales cycle. And we can start controlling the narrative now, ahead of time. Now you're really getting the most, I think, out of video and helping, and it's a tool that helps you drive the deal through the cycle, as opposed to just being reactionary. So with that, I thank you all very much for your time and your attention today. I thank Derek and the Consensus team for allowing me the opportunity to speak to the user community. I hope that some of our learnings and trial and errors will help make you a little bit more efficient and effective. And I'd be happy to stick around and answer any questions that you may have. So I'll turn it back to you, Derek.
Hey, thanks a lot, Earl. Really great session, great insights. There were a few questions that came in over the last, over your presentation. So the first one is, can you give an example of when you've sent a video with the right content, but at the wrong time?
Yeah, I started to allude to this a little bit, but let me be a little bit more specific. We were so excited when we first started using Consensus around the power of the tool that we just wanted to show every prospect everything because we thought more was better. And we didn't line up those priorities with the content we were sending. And so early in the sales cycle, this particular prospect was just kind of kicking the tires and figuring out who we are and what we do along with our competitors. And we needed to show them what outcomes we can drive, not the details of how our software would do it. But man, we just piled all this detail in terms of how our software works and the workflows. Look how great the user interface is. And that was a complete mismatch. Now, had that video been sent, once we got to the right point in the sales cycle, it would have been perfect from a content perspective. But we just confused the issue. We slowed things down. We got sucked into some technical rabbit holes we didn't want to go down. And it was not a great way to start a relationship and build confidence with that prospect that that we've been through this before and we're a viable partner. We just wanted to show off our stuff and it just didn't work.
All right. Someone said, I'm interested in knowing more about the types of videos your executives send.
Okay. So we do some creative things, and luckily for us, our executives love to be in front of the camera, which is kind of cool. So we've had executives include just an introductory vignette, a commitment to a partnership as part of RFP submissions. So as we reply to RFPs, we may attach a video from our COO, our CEO, that just kind of spells out who we are, what we're all about, what our culture is all about, what our experience is all about. As we get further and further through a sales cycle, we've had our executives introduce the team. I think I may have alluded to this during the talk, but introduce the team that's that he's assembled to really go through the life cycle. We leverage our executives when it's time to celebrate things. I mean, our executives love to celebrate. Typically, we like to go on site and have a big party when we go live. Obviously, we can't do that during pandemics. So we've done a lot of videos, with a lot of people in a lot of different departments congratulating our prospects when they go live or when they hit certain milestones. Any chance we get to include a vignette, either from our executive by themselves or as part of a greater, as a welcome to a series of vignettes that other people have recorded that may be a little bit more detailed or tactical, any chance we get to put our executive in front of the camera, we do. So I encourage everyone to give a lot of thought to that, particularly if your executives are amenable to that.
Okay. And any suggestions on how long these videos should be?
Yeah, again, that kind of aligns with what it is you're trying to accomplish. So I would say early on when we try, and we've learned that it's more effective that if you err on the side of more vignettes, but they're short, between no more than 2.5, 3 minutes, they're a lot more consumable than fewer vignettes that are longer. And that's especially true at the beginning of the sales cycle and towards the end of the sales cycle. Now, if you're setting expectations about really detailed, again, what I like to call the army crawl through the software in the middle of the sales cycle, those can be longer, because those are specific use cases where we're walking through our software in the form of from a persona's perspective about how I would use the software, where I would go next, what I would do, how I would configure it, that sort of thing. Those can be longer, but even those need to be consumable. So we try to keep those less than 5 minutes. And again, err on the side of more vignettes than fewer, and just make them shorter. So it all depends on the timing of where you are in that sales cycle, but the rules of thumb that the Consensus team has shared with us, we found to really work, because when we try to be too wordy, people don't forward it along, and people don't the video along to others in the organization, or people just don't consume it, or they consume one vignette and then they don't want to consume the others.
Yep, we see that all the time.
Yeah.
We're nearly out of time, but I've got one last question here. How have you leveraged video early in the sales cycle to get all stakeholders involved so they don't emerge and slow deals down at the end of the sales cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something that we've really been focused on recently from a learning, and that is, when we're qualifying a deal up front, of course we want to understand, like any sales qualifying process, where you figure out who needs to sign off on a deal to make it happen. That's kind of sales 101. So we try to ask the questions around, who are all the stakeholders going to be, whether or not they're in the signing process, but who has the potential to block us. So we think about people from marketing, people from IT, people from pricing, people from sales and executives and so forth, operations, and really try and ask, who are the stakeholders in those types of departments? Because our prospects may not be, the project leader may not be thinking about, oh yeah, the VP of sales will eventually be impacted by this, but they're not really involved in this. So, but by us asking the question, we can now get a name, and we can start leveraging video to address that individual and try and draw out what some of their potential risk factors that they see moving ahead with a project that could eventually become blockers, and start heading them off at the pass. So maybe not right in the beginning, but once we've ascertained who these key stakeholders are, and we've earned the right to say, can we get them in a meeting and really kind of show them what we can do? For those who are able to attend, it's great to send them a video to reinforce what we've told them and how we've addressed their forthcoming concerns around risk. And for those who can't make the meeting, the video becomes even more important in terms of disseminating that message.
Good deal. All right, well, Earl, thank you so much for your time. We've really enjoyed this session. Thank you for everybody that attended. For our next sessions at the top of the hour, we've got our senior product manager, Brian Zurcher. He'll be speaking about enabling channel with automated demos. And then track 2, we've got Miles Taylor, my colleague in client success, speaking about next level sales user training. We'll see you at the next session. Thank you again for everybody that attended. And Earl, thank you so much again. Everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye.